Have you ever wondered what really happens when someone gets absolute power with zero consequences? Right now you're probably thinking, that could never happen today. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It's happening. Different faces, different times, but the same pattern. Power without limits. Control through fear. Dignity traded for survival. You see it in your workplace when someone untouchable uses their position to humiliate others. You feel it when authority figures cross lines because they know no one will stop them. You recognize it when people stay silent, not from agreement, but from terror of what speaking up might cost them. That knot in your stomach? That's the same knot Romans felt in 39 AD. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror. And what you'll see in this mirror might shake you to your core. Caligula wasn't just a crazy emperor. That's the sanitized version they teach in schools. The reality was far more calculated, far more disturbing, and far more relevant to your life than you ever imagined. He discovered something that powerful people throughout history have exploited. Sexual humiliation is the ultimate weapon. It doesn't just destroy a person, it destroys their family, their reputation, their will to resist. It creates a silence so deep that victims become accomplices in their own oppression. Senators who commanded armies were reduced to entertainment. Wives of the most powerful men became tools of political control. Daughters were sacrificed to protect their families. And everyone smiled. Everyone applauded. Everyone pretended it was normal. Sound familiar? In the next few minutes, you'll discover the hidden mechanisms Caligula used to transform Rome from a civilization of laws into a playground of terror. But more importantly, you'll understand why these same patterns keep repeating throughout history and how to recognize them before it's too late. This isn't about ancient Rome. This is about power, about manipulation, about the breaking point where good people choose silence over resistance. And by the end of this story, you'll know the one thing that finally stopped him, the one factor that no tyrant, no matter how powerful, can ultimately control. Because Caligula's empire fell. And understanding how it fell might be the most important lesson you learn today. Let's go back to where it all began. The year is 39 AD. Rome dominates the known world. Its legions march undefeated across the ends of the earth. Its aqueducts defy gravity. Its roads connect continents. The Colosseum doesn't exist yet, but Roman power is already absolute. Millions of people live under the imperial eagle, and the name of Rome resonates as a synonym for civilization, order, and eternal glory. But at this exact moment, while the empire breathes its greatness, something is rotten at the heart of Rome. Inside the imperial palace, in the shadows of marble columns and beneath ceilings painted with scenes of the gods, a man is about to transform the most powerful city in the world into a theater of horror. A man who carries the title of emperor, but who will soon prove to be much more than that, or much less. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but history knows him by a nickname he earned as a child when he accompanied his father on military campaigns, dressed in miniature armor, Caligula, Little Boot, an almost childish name for a man who is about to stain Rome with blood, lust, and madness. If you're enjoying this incredible story, drop a like right now. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any detail of this disturbing saga. Share it with your friends who love history. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? Have you heard of Caligula before? Let us know. To understand how we got here, we need to go back just a few months in time. In March of 37 AD, Emperor Tiberius dies on the island of Capri. Tiberius was a complex man, a brilliant general who became a reclusive and paranoid ruler. His final years were marked by isolation, distrust, and a series of executions that left Rome in a state of perpetual tension. The Senate feared his letters. The people despised him. When he finally died at 77, few mourned. The power vacuum that followed could have plunged Rome into chaos. But there was a successor. A young man of only 24, great-grandson of the legendary Emperor Augustus, son of the beloved general Germanicus, a young man who grew up among soldiers, who knew the value of discipline and military honor, a man who, in the eyes of many, represented the hope of a new era. Caligula assumed the throne amid a wave of unprecedented enthusiasm. The streets of Rome exploded in celebration. The people saw in him the promise of renewal, the end of Tiberius's dark years. The Senate, though cautious, showed optimism. After all, Caligula was young, energetic, and carried the blood of Rome's greatest leaders. In the first months of his reign, he seemed to confirm all hopes. He granted amnesty to political prisoners. He reduced taxes. He organized magnificent games for the people. He restored the Senate's dignity, consulting it on important decisions. Rome breathed with relief. The nightmare of Tiberius was over. A new dawn shone over the empire. But then something changed. Some say it was an illness. In the fall of 37 AD, Caligula became gravely ill. For weeks he remained between life and death, while Rome held its breath. When he finally recovered, he was no longer the same man. The eyes that once shone with promise now carried something different. Something cold. Something disturbing. Others believed the illness was just an excuse, that the real Caligula had always been there, hidden beneath the mask of the promising young emperor. That absolute power merely revealed what had always existed in his heart, an insatiable hunger for control, pleasure, and worship. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. From that moment on, Rome would never be the same. The new emperor, from promise of reform to personal fury. The young emperor who promised stability began making increasingly erratic decisions. Experienced advisors were removed without explanation. Tiberius's allies, who could have offered wisdom and continuity, were executed or exiled. In their place, Caligula surrounded himself with flatterers, with men and women who would say yes to any imperial whim. Caligula's first major speech to the Senate had been memorable. He entered the chamber with the posture of a born leader, his firm voice echoing off the stone walls. "Senator gentlemen," he began, "Rome will no longer need to live under the cloak of fear. The time of conspiracies is over. The time of transparency has begun. We will govern together as in the glorious days of Augustus." The Senate applauded standing. Experienced men, who had witnessed decades of political intrigue, felt tears roll down their aged faces. Finally, an emperor who respected institutions. Finally, a leader who understood the delicate balance between imperial power and republican tradition. But Caligula's words were hollow. Less than 3 months after that speech, the same Senate that had applauded him began whispering in the shadowy corridors of the Forum. The young emperor was changing, and the change was terrifying. Marcus Silanus was the first to notice. A longtime senator, advisor to 3 emperors, a man respected for his wisdom and moderation. Caligula summoned him for a private audience at the palace. Silanus arrived expecting to discuss state matters, perhaps the administration of the eastern provinces or the situation of the legions in Germania. Instead, he found a transfigured emperor. Caligula received him half-naked, lying on a purple velvet couch, surrounded by young servants offering him grapes and wine. "Marcus," said Caligula, his voice drawling and different, "do you think I'm handsome?" Silanus hesitated. "Your Majesty, I came to discuss. Answer my question." The tone changed. It was no longer lazy. It was dangerous. "Yes, Your Majesty, your person is pleasing to the eyes." Caligula smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just caught the scent of fear in its prey. "Pleasing? Just pleasing? Marcus, I am a god among mortals, and you insult me with your mediocrity." 3 days later, Silanus was dead. The official version spoke of health issues, but everyone in Rome knew the truth. The emperor had given his first demonstration of power, and the message was clear: agree with me, or disappear. The promised reforms never came. The taxes, which had been reduced, began to rise again. But now they didn't serve to finance roads or aqueducts. They served to finance the emperor's growing pleasures. Parties that lasted weeks, megalomaniacal constructions without practical purpose, extravagant gifts for favorites who entered and left imperial favor with disconcerting speed. Caligula began to centralize power systematically. First, he dissolved the imperial council that Tiberius had established. "I don't need old men telling me what to do," he declared publicly. Then he began to interfere directly in Senate decisions. Bills were approved or rejected according to his morning mood. Senators who dared to disagree were summoned to the palace for private conversations, from which they often emerged pale and mute. The Roman government structure built over centuries began to crumble. The balance between emperor, senate, and people, which had kept the empire functioning even in the most turbulent periods, was being destroyed by the will of a single man. And this man was getting stranger and stranger. Caligula began having conversations with statues. According to palace witnesses, he spent hours talking to representations of Jupiter, waiting for answers that only he seemed to hear. He developed sudden and inexplicable fixations. For weeks he insisted that the entire palace should eat only red food. Then he changed to blue. The imperial cooks worked day and night to meet his chromatic whims. But these eccentricities, though disturbing, were just the beginning. Because while Rome tried to understand the mood swings of its emperor, while the Senate whispered in corners and the people began to miss even Tiberius, Caligula was preparing something much darker. He was redesigning not just Rome's political structure, he was redesigning his own nature, transforming himself from man into something different, something Rome had never seen, something that would test the limits of morality, decency, and human sanity itself. And it all began with his appetites. Appetites that would soon become public, scandalous, and impossible to ignore. The transformation of Caligula was complete. The promising young man had disappeared. In his place, a monster emerged. And Rome, the greatest empire in the world, was about to become the playground for his darkest desires. The first scandals, the beginning of sexual decadence. The first rumors began in the palace kitchens. They always start there. Servants whispering among themselves while preparing imperial banquets. Guards exchanging knowing glances when crossing certain corridors at night. Slaves who had seen things they should never have witnessed. At first, no one believed. How could they? The emperor of Rome, descendant of Augustus, doing that? Impossible. They must be exaggerations, distortions of minor facts. Rome was a city of gossip, after all. Always had been. But then the banquets began. Lucius Vitellius, respected senator and war veteran, was the first to publicly describe what he had witnessed. He did so in a drunken whisper in a tavern near the Forum, surrounded by trusted friends. But in Rome, there are no secrets. 3 days later, the whole city knew. "He made us sit in order of beauty," Vitellius recounted, his fingers trembling as he held his wine cup. Not of political importance, not of seniority in the Senate, of beauty, as if we were slaves in a meat market. The banquet in question had occurred in the new hall that Caligula had ordered built in the palace. A colossal space, with a ceiling painted representing scenes of Bacchus, walls covered in crimson silk, and a polished marble floor that reflected the torches like a black mirror. 50 senators had been summoned, imperial order, mandatory attendance. They arrived in their ceremonial togas, expecting a traditional political event, perhaps an important announcement about the provinces, perhaps a military celebration. They found something completely different. Caligula received them dressed in a translucent Alexandrian silk tunic, his feet bare, his hair perfumed with oriental oils. Around him, female and male dancers moved in choreographies that left little to the imagination. The music was loud, pulsating, almost hypnotic. "Welcome, my friends," said Caligula, his voice cutting through the music. "Tonight we celebrate not the power of Rome, but the power of pleasure. Tonight you will learn that there are forces greater than laws and traditions." What followed was described by witnesses as a descent into Dionysian hell. Caligula ordered the senators to remove their togas and wear only light tunics. Those who hesitated were encouraged by the Praetorian Guard surrounding the hall. Men who had governed provinces, commanded legions, were reduced to reluctant participants in an increasingly uncontrolled party. The emperor circulated among them, touching, commenting, comparing. "You have strong shoulders, Gaius. You must have been an impressive warrior in your youth." And then to another, "Marcus, you should take better care of yourself. A Roman senator cannot look like a fat Phoenician merchant. But the real shock came when Caligula began to select. Like a farmer choosing cattle, he pointed to this or that senator and led them to private chambers adjacent to the hall. What happened inside, only the selected ones knew, and none of them spoke. But their faces, when they emerged hours later, told stories that words could not express. This was not an isolated occurrence. It became regular practice. Once a month, then once a week, Caligula summoned members of the Roman elite to his banquets. And each one was more extravagant, more transgressive than the previous one. He began inviting senators' wives, respected women of high society, matrons who had spent decades cultivating reputations of virtue and dignity. Caligula made them sit beside him during banquets, whispering in their ears while their husbands watched helplessly from afar. Caelia Metella, wife of one of Rome's wealthiest men, was one of the first. She was 40 years old, had 3 grown children, and an immaculate reputation. Caligula summoned her alone for a private audience. When she arrived at the palace, she found the emperor in his private chambers, surrounded by servants who disappeared at his command. "Caelia," he said, "I was told you were the most beautiful woman in Rome 20 years ago. I need to verify if it's still true." She had 2 choices: obey or refuse. Refusing would mean not only her ruin, but her husband's, her children's, her entire family's. Obeying meant sacrificing everything she had built, all her honor. She obeyed. When she left the palace 3 hours later, her face was white as marble. She entered her litter without saying a word. At home, she locked herself in her chambers and didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Her husband, Marcus Metellus, a senator of 2 decades, said nothing. He couldn't, because he knew that questioning the emperor meant condemning his entire family. This was Caligula's true power, not military force, not legal authority, but fear. The paralyzing fear that an imperial whim could destroy generations of social construction in an instant. And Caligula didn't hide his acts. On the contrary, he boasted about them. During public banquets, he commented openly about the women he had known. He compared them aloud, discussing intimate details while their husbands sat around the table, forced to smile and agree. "Lucius's wife is more passionate than Marcus's," he declared once, drinking wine and laughing. "But Julius's, Julius, you're a lucky man. Your wife has talents the gods would envy." Julius smiled, applauded, thanked the compliment. And that night at home he cried in silence. But the deepest scandal, the one that truly shook Rome's moral foundations, came when rumors about Caligula's sisters began to circulate. He had 3, Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla, young women of the highest Roman nobility, direct descendants of Augustus. Drusilla, the middle one, was particularly close to Caligula. Since childhood, they were inseparable. When Caligula became emperor, he elevated Drusilla to an unprecedented position. She sat beside him during official audiences. She was consulted on state decisions. She received honors generally reserved only for the emperor's wife. The problem was that Caligula already had a wife, and the honors he granted Drusilla went far beyond what would be appropriate for a sister. Palace servants began reporting disturbing scenes. Caligula and Drusilla dining alone in private chambers late into the night. Being seen in embraces that lasted too long, were too intense. Some swear they heard compromising sounds coming from the imperial chambers, at times when Drusilla was inside and the empress was out. Rome didn't want to believe. Incest was an absolute taboo, condemned by divine and human law. But the evidence accumulated. And when Drusilla died suddenly in 38 AD, Caligula's reaction confirmed Rome's worst fears. He went into absolute mourning. He declared Drusilla a goddess. He ordered temples built in her honor. And most shocking of all, he decreed that focusing on work during the mourning period was a capital crime. All of Rome stopped. The empire froze. All because the emperor had lost his sister. Or perhaps something more than a sister. The sexual decadence that had begun in private banquets now contaminated the entire social structure of Rome. The morality that had sustained the empire for centuries was being corroded by the uncontrolled lust of a single man. And the worst, was yet to come. Because Caligula didn't see his acts as transgressions, he saw them as rights of a superior being, rights of a god. The empire of Caligula, sexuality as power. Caligula had discovered something that no emperor before him fully understood. Sexuality wasn't just pleasure, it was the most efficient form of human control. Money could be recovered, lands could be reconquered, political power could be redistributed, but dignity, once destroyed, was rarely restored. And Caligula became a master at destroying dignity. He developed a system, an almost scientific method of control through sexual humiliation. Each important member of the Roman elite was studied, analyzed, their weaknesses mapped. Then, at the right moment, Caligula attacked. Gaius Proculus was one of Rome's most respected generals, veteran of 20 campaigns, decorated by 3 emperors, a man of impeccable military reputation. But he had a weakness. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world. Proculus's daughter, Livia, was 18 years old. Beautiful, educated, betrothed to a young and promising senator. Her future was laid out. She would be a respected wife, mother of future Roman leaders, a pillar of society. Caligula summoned her to the palace. The invitation was optional, but in Caligula's Rome, nothing was optional. Livia arrived accompanied by her mother, as was appropriate. They were received with all pomp. Caligula was cordial, even charming. He conversed about art, literature, philosophy. He seemed genuinely interested in Livia's opinions on Homeric poetry. Then, casually, he said, "Livia, you should visit my private gardens. The roses are magnificent at this time." The mother began to rise to accompany her. Caligula raised his hand. "Alone. The gardens are a place of silent reflection." What happened in those gardens, only Caligula and Livia knew. But when she emerged 2 hours later, something had changed in her eyes. That night, Proculus visited the palace. He requested a private audience with the emperor. No one knows what was said in that meeting. But when Proculus left, he was bent like an 80-year-old man, though he was only 45. A week later, he resigned command of his legions. A month later, he left Rome. He went to live in a remote villa in southern Italy, where he spent the rest of his days in silence. The great general of Rome had been broken, not with swords, not with politics, but with something far more devastating. Caligula used this tactic repeatedly. He identified what each man loved most, and then he corrupted it, stained it, destroyed it. Wives, daughters, sometimes even sons. No one was safe. The message was clear. Everything you love can be taken from you. Everything you value can be profaned. And so Rome became a city of broken men. Senators who had faced Germanic barbarians without flinching now trembled upon receiving imperial invitations. Generals who had commanded legions in bloody battles now bowed and obeyed orders they would never have considered following. But Caligula wasn't content with controlling only men. He transformed high society women into tools of his politics. He developed the habit of borrowing senators' wives. He summoned a respected matron, spent a night with her, and then returned her to her husband the next morning, usually with public comments about the experience. "Thank you for lending Claudia, Marcus," he once said during a Senate session. "She was very educational. You trained her well." Marcus smiled, thanked him, and everyone in the Senate pretended this was normal, because disagreeing meant becoming the next target, and no one wanted to be the next target. The orgies became semi-official events. Caligula organized them in the palace, but also in public places, gardens, theaters. Once, even in the Temple of Vesta, profaning one of Rome's most sacred places. Participation was voluntary, but those who didn't participate were noticed. And being noticed by Caligula in his absence was dangerous. He kept lists of who attended, who participated enthusiastically, who hesitated. And he used this information to determine appointments, promotions, land grants. Political loyalty was now measured not by administrative capacity or military achievements, but by willingness to abdicate one's own dignity. But the most disturbing aspect of Caligula's system was its strategic randomness. He was never predictable. He could be generous and charming one day, cruel and vindictive the next. This inconsistency kept everyone in a state of perpetual anxiety. No one knew if they would be rewarded or punished. No one knew if their families would be safe. This state of uncertainty was more effective than any army, because an army can be confronted, resisted. But how does one resist one's own mind? How does one fight the fear that corrodes from within? Caligula also began using sexuality as a form of specific public humiliation. During games at the circus, he occasionally pointed to some senator in the audience and ordered him to descend to the arena. There, the man would be forced to perform humiliating acts before tens of thousands of spectators. Dance, sing, sometimes worse things, and the crowd applauded. Because the crowd, as always, followed whoever was in power. If the emperor thought it was funny, it must be funny. If the emperor applauded, they applauded. Rome, the city that had built a civilization based on virtue and dignity, now laughed while its leaders were degraded for entertainment. But while Rome laughed and obeyed, something was boiling beneath the surface. In the dark corners of taverns, in the whispers of Senate corridors, in secret letters exchanged between cautious allies. Rage, frustration, hatred. However, these feelings still had no form. They still had no leadership, because Caligula had been too efficient at breaking anyone who could oppose him. He had transformed the most powerful men of Rome into shadows of themselves. And now, with the entire empire under his control, with every instrument of power in his hands, Caligula was ready to take the next step, a step that would prove to be even more shocking than everything that came before. He was ready to transcend humanity, to become not just Lord of Rome, but Lord of the gods themselves. And when a man declares himself a god, there are no limits to what he can demand from his worshippers. The ascension to the divine, Caligula as god. Everything changed on a full moon night in June of 39 AD. Caligula convened an extraordinary assembly at the Capitoline, the religious heart of Rome. It wasn't a common summons. The entire Senate should attend. All priests from all temples, representatives of each of the great families. And stranger still, the assembly would be held at midnight, Rome filled with torches. Thousands of flames dotting the darkness, creating a river of light that climbed Capitoline Hill. The atmosphere was tense, electric. Something important was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what. The Temple of Jupiter. Optimus Maximus dominated the hilltop, its white columns gleaming under the moonlight. Inside, Rome's elite waited, dressed in white ceremonial togas. The silence was absolute. Only the crackling of torches broke the stillness. Then Caligula entered. But it wasn't the Caligula that Rome knew. He was dressed in golden robes embroidered with threads of real gold. On his head, a crown of laurels intertwined with golden lightning bolts, symbolizing Jupiter. In one hand, he held a scepter. In the other, a stylized thunderbolt made of pure gold. He walked slowly down the central corridor, his steps echoing on the marble. Every person present felt the weight of the moment. Something fundamental was changing. Something that would forever alter the relationship between Rome and its emperor. Caligula climbed the steps to the colossal statue of Jupiter. He turned to face the crowd. And then, with a clear and firm voice that left no room for doubt, he declared, "Romans, for too long you have worshipped distant gods, gods of stone and legend. Tonight a god walks among you in flesh and blood. Tonight Jupiter has recognized me as his equal. Tonight I declare myself divine." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. Because what Caligula had just done was unthinkable. Roman emperors were honored after death, sometimes deified by the Senate. But a living emperor declaring himself a god? This went against every tradition, every belief, every foundation of Roman religion. An old priest of Jupiter, a man of 70 who had served the temple for 5 decades, stepped forward. His voice trembled, but was firm. "Your Majesty, it cannot be. The gods..." He never finished the sentence. 2 Praetorian guards emerged from the shadows, grabbed the priest by the arms, and dragged him out of the temple. His screams echoed in the night and then fell abruptly silent. No one knew what happened to him. No one wanted to know. Caligula looked at the crowd. Does anyone else have doubts about my divinity? Total silence. Excellent. Then let's establish the new rules. From this night on, a temple will be built in my honor. Not a small temple. The largest temple Rome has ever seen. It will surpass even this one dedicated to my brother Jupiter. Brother. He had called Jupiter his brother, as if they were equals. All citizens of Rome will make monthly offerings. All senators will come to pay homage weekly. And when they address me, they will no longer use emperor or Caesar. They will use divinity, because that's what I am. In the following days, Rome witnessed an unprecedented transformation. Caligula ordered that sculptures of him be placed in all the important temples of the city. Not beside the statues of the gods, but in their place. Statues of Jupiter, Mars, Apollo, all were removed and replaced with images of Caligula. The temple of Castor and Pollux in the Forum was particularly profaned. Caligula transformed it into a vestibule of his own palace, literally placing himself between the people and the twin gods. When citizens went to make offerings, they had to pass by a statue of Caligula first. But the most megalomaniacal construction was the new Temple of Caligula, erected in record time by thousands of workers operating day and night. It was a colossal structure of white marble imported from Greece with columns 50 feet high and a golden roof that could be seen from any point in Rome. Inside, a 30-foot-tall statue of Caligula covered in gold, with eyes made of giant sapphires imported from the east. The statue represented him nude, muscular, perfect. At his feet, smaller figures representing prostrate mortals in worship. The cost was astronomical. Imperial treasures accumulated over decades were exhausted in months. Taxes rose vertiginously. Wealthy families were accused of fabricated crimes, their properties confiscated to finance the project. Rome, which had built its greatness through centuries of work and conquest, was being bled to feed the megalomania of a single man. And Caligula wasn't satisfied with just public worship. He demanded private devotion as well. He ordered that every Roman household, from senatorial palaces to modest dwellings, should have a small statue of him. And not just have it, venerate it, make daily offerings, pray to him. Spies were spread throughout Rome to verify compliance. Families denounced families. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Not having a statue or having one but not showing adequate devotion was considered treason against imperial divinity, and treason was punished by death. Senate sessions became bizarre religious rituals. Before any political discussion, all senators had to kneel before a statue of Caligula and recite prayers. Prayers he himself had written, full of exaggerated flattery. O Caligula, light of the world, father of the gods, lord of heaven and earth, they recited in unison, their voices echoing off the stone walls. We are unworthy of your presence. We are less than ants beneath your divine feet. Grant us wisdom through your infinite grace. Men who had governed provinces, commanded armies, negotiated with foreign kings, now knelt and recited these words. And then they rose, returned to their seats, and discussed politics as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Because Rome had learned to normalize the absurd. It was either that or go insane. Caligula also began requiring attendance at religious ceremonies dedicated to him. Every week, grand celebrations were held in his temple. Thousands of people attended, not out of genuine devotion, but out of fear. Guards noted who was present and who was absent. The absent received unpleasant visits. During these ceremonies, Caligula frequently appeared personally, dressed in increasingly extravagant clothes, crowns of pearls, purple silk tunics covered in precious stones, golden sandals. He sat on an elevated throne while crowds prostrated themselves before him, and sometimes whimsically he chose people from the crowd. You, come here. The person would climb up, trembling. Kiss my feet. And they kissed, because refusing was unthinkable. But the most significant confrontation came when Caligula decided to extend his cult to the provinces. He ordered that all cities of the empire, from Hispania to Syria, build temples dedicated to him, and he demanded that all conquered peoples, including the Jews of Judea, worship him. The Jews refused. It was a fundamental part of their faith, not to worship idols, not to recognize false gods, and definitely not to worship a living man as a god. When Caligula's emissaries arrived in Jerusalem with orders to install a statue of him in the temple, the people revolted. Caligula was furious. He planned a military expedition to subjugate Judea, promising to transform the Temple of Jerusalem into a temple dedicated to himself. Only the intervention of advisors who managed to convince him of the military costs prevented a large-scale war. But the incident revealed something important. For the first time, someone had said no to Caligula. And although he couldn't punish an entire people immediately, the resistance had planted a seed. If the Jews could refuse, why couldn't the Romans? This thought began to circulate quietly among the senators, in whispered conversations, in exchanged glances. Caligula's divinity wasn't inevitable. It was a farce, a dangerous farce, but still a farce. And farces can be undone. Meanwhile, Caligula sank deeper into his own fantasy. He began having conversations with other gods. According to witnesses, he argued animatedly with statues of Jupiter, sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing. Once, he was seen shouting at a statue of Neptune, accusing the god of the sea of conspiring against him. His perception of reality was fragmenting. He was no longer a man pretending to be a god. He genuinely believed in his own divinity. And this belief made him even more dangerous. Because a man who sees himself as a god recognizes no limits, accepts no consequences, fears no judgment. And Rome, the greatest empire in the world, was being governed by this man. A man who had transcended not just human laws, but sanity itself. The question was no longer if something terrible would happen. It was when, and how devastating it would be when it finally arrived. The moral collapse of Rome, the empire on the brink of ruin, the decadence that had begun in the imperial palace now contaminated every corner of Rome. It was like a disease, spreading through the social layers, corrupting everything it touched. The aristocrats, seeing how Caligula used immorality as a tool of power, began to imitate his behaviors. Private parties became increasingly extravagant, more transgressive. What would have been scandalous before was now considered normal. After all, if the emperor god himself did that, how could it be wrong? Traditional families, who had maintained impeccable reputations for generations, began to crumble. Marriages were dissolved by imperial whims. Caligula had the habit of dissolving unions that displeased him and arranging new ones according to his will. Like a god manipulating pieces on a board. Julia had been married to Lucius for 15 years. They had 4 children. They were happy, or at least as happy as possible in Caligula's Rome, until the emperor saw her during a public ceremony and decided she would be more suitable married to another senator, an ally Caligula wanted to reward. The marriage was annulled by imperial decree. Julia was transferred to the new husband as if she were property. Her children remained with Lucius. She never saw them again. Lucius, devastated, became an alcoholic. He died 2 years later, apparently from natural causes, though rumors suggested he had chosen his own end. These stories multiplied. Rome was full of destroyed marriages, shattered families, lives ruined by imperial whims. And no one could protest. Protesting meant questioning a god. And gods are not questioned. Public morality, which had been the foundation of Roman society, was collapsing. The traditional temples, once centers of religious and social life, were empty. Why go to Venus's temple when it was safer to go to Caligula's temple? Why make offerings to Mars when the emperor god demanded exclusive worship? Traditional priests, guardians of centuries of religious tradition, were marginalized. Many abandoned their vocations. Some were forced to become priests of the cult of Caligula, celebrating rituals they themselves considered blasphemous. Marcus Aurelius Severus was Flamen Dialis, high priest of Jupiter, a position his family had occupied for 5 generations. A deeply religious man, he had dedicated his life to serving the traditional gods. When Caligula ordered that all priests transfer their loyalties to his personal cult, Severus refused. He was taken to the palace. Caligula received him personally. "Severus," said the emperor, "you are a priest of Jupiter, but I am Jupiter incarnate. Therefore, by serving me, you serve the very god you swore to venerate." Severus looked into Caligula's eyes and saw madness. Pure, distilled madness. "Your Majesty," he responded carefully, "Jupiter is eternal. You are—" "I am what?" "Say it. Complete your sentence." The silence stretched. Finally, Severus lowered his head. "Your divinity is right. I was confused. Forgive your humble servant." He became a priest of the cult of Caligula, but something died inside him that day. Those who knew him said he became an empty shell, performing rituals mechanically, without the faith that once illuminated every gesture. While traditional Roman religion withered, a silent resistance began to form. It wasn't organized. It had no clear leaders. It was more a shared feeling, an underground current of revolt that connected those who still remembered how Rome used to be. In dark taverns, far from imperial ears, men whispered about the old times, when emperors respected laws, when the Senate had real power, when Roman citizens lived with dignity, not perpetual fear. "My grandfather told me stories of Augustus," a merchant would say, nervously looking around. "Said he walked the streets like a common citizen, that he listened to people, that he respected traditions." "My father served under Germanicus," a veteran would respond. "Caligula's father. He was a great man, fair, honorable. How did the son become this? How did the gods allow it?" These conversations were dangerous. Informers were everywhere. Caligula's espionage system had become sophisticated and comprehensive. Neighbors informed on neighbors for rewards. Slaves informed on masters to gain freedom. Even within families, trust had become a dangerous luxury. But the resistance persisted, because the human spirit, when sufficiently oppressed, eventually finds ways to react. And Rome was being oppressed like never before in its history. Attempts to eliminate Caligula began to emerge. Small conspiracies, poorly planned, easily discovered. A senator who tried to poison the imperial wine. A Praetorian guard who planned to drive a dagger during a ceremony. A group of military officers who discussed a coup. All were discovered. All were punished in spectacularly cruel ways. And each punishment served as a warning to other potential conspirators. There is no escape. There is no salvation, only obedience. The Roman economy, once the most robust in the known world, began to falter. Caligula's insane spending had exhausted treasures accumulated over decades. Taxes reached confiscatory levels. Merchants went bankrupt. Farmers abandoned their lands, unable to pay the required taxes. Rich provinces like Egypt and Syria were bled to sustain the imperial lifestyle. Provincial governors, appointed not for competence but for loyalty to Caligula, administered their regions with spectacular incompetence, concerned only with extracting enough wealth to satisfy the emperor. Rome, which had conquered the world with discipline and organization, was becoming chaotic. The structures that had sustained the empire for centuries were cracking under the pressure of one man's megalomania. And Caligula, isolated in his palace, surrounded by flatterers and immersed in his fantasies of divinity, didn't notice. Or perhaps he noticed and didn't care. After all, what do the concerns of mortals matter to a god? But even gods can fall, and the higher they rise, the more devastating the fall. Rome was reaching a breaking point. Something had to give. Someone had to act. And in silence, in the shadows of the empire, those who still had courage began planning not more small conspiracies doomed to failure, but something bigger, something definitive. The end was coming. But before the end, there would be one last spectacle, one last demonstration of imperial madness that would seal Caligula's fate forever. The imperial banquet, the final challenge, January of 41 AD. Caligula convened what would be his largest and most extravagant banquet. It wouldn't be in the palace. It would be in the Senate itself, transforming the political heart of Rome into the scene of his last great celebration. The order was clear. All senators should attend, all important officers, all priests of the imperial cult. No one would be excused. Not illness, not mourning, not military responsibilities would justify absence. The preparations took weeks. The Senate Hall was completely transformed. Silk fabrics covered the austere stone walls. Luxurious couches replaced the traditional benches. Hundreds of golden lamps hung from the ceiling, creating a golden, almost surreal illumination. In the center, a throne. Not a modest seat, but a colossal structure of marble and gold, elevated 10 feet above the floor, accessible only by silver steps. Behind the throne, a silk curtain representing the sky, with Caligula painted as Jupiter, casting lightning bolts upon prostrate mortals. Night fell. All of Rome knew about the banquet. Crowds gathered outside the Senate, curious about what would happen. Praetorian guards surrounded the building in concentric rings. No one would enter or leave without imperial permission. Inside, 200 senators waited. Their traditional white togas had been replaced by colorful tunics that Caligula had demanded. "White is the color of mourning," he had declared. "Tonight, we celebrate life. We celebrate the divine." The doors opened. Music echoed through the walls. Flutes, lyres, drums creating an almost hypnotic cacophony. Dancers entered, their minimal clothing scandalizing even Romans accustomed to imperial excesses. Then, Caligula appeared. He was dressed as never before. A tunic of pure gold, so heavy he needed servants to support it. On his head a crown that looked more like armor, covered in diamonds that reflected the lamplight like 1,000 stars. On his face, golden makeup that gave him an almost inhuman appearance. He climbed the steps to his throne slowly, theatrically. Each step carefully calculated for maximum impact. When he finally sat down, he raised his hands, and the music ceased instantly. "Romans," his voice resonated through the hall. "Tonight marks a new era. No longer the era of Rome as a disguised republic, no longer the era of democratic pretensions. Tonight begins the era of the divine empire." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I have decreed something fundamental. Rome will be transformed. Every building will be rebuilt in gold. Every statue will be mine. Every street will bear my name. Rome will no longer be a city of mortals. It will be a city of a god. My city. My living temple." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Rebuild all of Rome? The cost would be incalculable. It would take decades. It would economically destroy the empire. Caligula smiled, as if he could hear their thoughts. Worried about costs? Don't be. The rich will pay. Those with properties will contribute. And those who refuse. He made a dramatic pause. Well, they won't need their properties anymore, will they? It was explicit blackmail. And everyone in the hall understood perfectly. "But tonight is not for discussions of worldly politics," continued Caligula, his mood changing rapidly. "Tonight is for celebration, for recognition, for proper worship." He clapped his hands. Servants entered carrying trays of food. But it wasn't a normal banquet. Every dish was covered in edible gold leaf. Wine was served in cups of solid gold, each worth more than a modest house. "Eat," ordered Caligula. "Drink. But first all of you will thank me, kneel, point to me, and say, 'Thank you, my God, for this divine meal.'" There was hesitation, brief, but noticeable. Then, slowly, 200 senators stood, knelt, and recited the words. Their voices mixed in a pathetic murmur of collective humiliation. Caligula laughed. A high, almost hysterical laugh. "Perfect. See how obedient you are, how well trained. My grandfather Augustus would be proud. He transformed Rome from republic to empire. I transform it from empire to divine paradise." The banquet continued for hours, food after food, wine after wine. The music became progressively louder, more frenetic. Dancers moved among the senators, sometimes pulling them to participate. Old, dignified men were forced to dance while Caligula applauded and laughed. Then when the night reached its peak, Caligula stood again. The hall fell instantly silent. "Now," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "We arrive at the true purpose of tonight. Some of you have doubts about my divinity. You think it's performance, political theater. Let me demonstrate how real my divine power is." He descended from the throne and walked to the center of the hall. "Bring Cassius Chaerea." A murmur ran through the crowd. Chaerea was a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, respected veteran, a man known for his integrity. Why would Caligula call him publicly? Chaerea entered, his expression neutral, but his eyes revealing tension. He knelt before Caligula. "Chaerea," said the emperor, his voice echoing through the hall. "I heard rumors that you consider me less than divine, that you whisper to other guards about the old days. Is it true?" Chaerea kept his head down. "No, Divine Majesty." "No? Then why did your colleagues tell me exactly that? Are you calling me a liar?" The trap was closed. To agree would be to admit treason. To disagree would be to call the emperor a liar. There was no right answer. Majesty, I serve loyally." "Loyally?" Caligula turned to the senators. "See, even my own guards doubt. This demonstrates why severe discipline is necessary, why punishment must be exemplary." He returned his attention to Chaerea. "You will have an opportunity to prove your loyalty. Tomorrow I will organize special games and you will fight in the arena against 3 gladiators. Survive, and your loyalty will be proven." The silence was absolute. Sending a tribune to the arena was maximum degradation. It was transforming a Roman officer into entertainment. And fighting against 3 gladiators? It was a death sentence in disguise. Chaerea raised his head. His eyes met Caligula's. And in that moment something passed between them. A recognition. A line being crossed. "As your divinity commands," said Chaerea, his voice perfectly controlled. He stood and left the hall, his back straight, his steps firm, a man walking not to defeat, but to something different. To decision. Caligula returned to his throne, apparently satisfied. The banquet continued until dawn. When it finally ended, the senators left staggering, exhausted not just physically, but mentally. They had witnessed something that transcended Caligula's normal excesses. They had seen a man completely disconnected from reality, living in a world where he was truly a god, and everyone else was less than insects. In the streets of Rome, as the sun rose over the Tiber, an unspoken question hung in the air. How much longer could this continue? How much longer could Rome endure the weight of imperial madness? The answer would come faster than anyone imagined. Because Cassius Chaerea wasn't just any guard, he was a man of action. And he had just received all the reasons necessary to act. Caligula's last banquet had sealed his own fate. He just didn't know it yet. The conspiracy and the death of Caligula, the end of the sexual empire. Cassius Chaerea didn't sleep that night. He returned to the Praetorian Guard barracks but didn't go to rest. He went to look for allies, because he knew that alone he couldn't do anything. But with other tired, humiliated, furious men? Perhaps there was a chance. The first he sought was Cornelius Sabinus, another tribune. Sabinus had served under Germanicus, Caligula's father, and kept memories of when the young prince was still a child. Seeing what that child had become was especially painful for him. "We need to talk," said Chaerea, entering Sabinus's room without knocking. "About what will happen tomorrow in the arena. About what will happen after." Sabinus looked at him. Silent understanding passed between them. "The walls have ears. Then let's go where there are no walls." They left the barracks, walked through the still dark streets of Rome, until they reached a small abandoned temple of Mars. The temple had been closed when Caligula ordered that all cults concentrate on his worship. Now it was empty, forgotten. Perfect for conspiracies. "He's going to send me to the arena," said Chaerea. "Not to test loyalty, to humiliate, to break, like he broke so many others." "You're not going," responded Sabinus simply. "No, because before tomorrow, Caligula will be dead." The words hung in the cold night air. Once spoken, there was no going back. They were absolute treason, punishable not just with death but with prolonged torture. with destruction of entire families, with obliteration of legacies. "Are you sure?" asked Cherea. "Aren't you?" Cherea thought about everything he had witnessed. About senators forced into humiliating dances, about virtuous women corrupted, about millennial religions profaned, about Rome, the eternal, being transformed into a stage for megalomaniacal fantasies. "Yes," he finally said, "I'm sure." In the following hours, others joined. Guards who were fed up, officers who remembered when Rome had dignity. Even one of Caligula's freedmen, a man who worked in the palace and knew every corridor, every door, every imperial routine. They planned meticulously. Timing would be crucial. The location, too. It couldn't be in the palace, too well guarded. Not in the arena, too public. It had to be in a moment of transition, when Caligula was vulnerable. The opportunity came through unexpected information. There would be games the next day celebrating what Caligula called the Festival of Imperial Divinity. He would attend as always. But after the games, he usually returned to the palace through an underground passage, a narrow corridor beneath the theater. There. It would be there. January 24th, 41 AD. The day dawned like any other in Rome. Citizens woke up, went to the market, worked, lived their lives under the Italian sun. They didn't know that before sunset, history would change forever. The games began at noon. Caligula arrived in grand style, dressed in his divine robes, waving to the crowd that applauded not from love, but from obligation. He sat in the imperial tribune, surrounded by guards and courtiers. The games were spectacular. Gladiators fought. Exotic animals were exhibited. Creative executions were performed for entertainment, and Caligula seemed truly happy, laughing, applauding, ordering additional executions when the mood struck him. He had completely forgotten about Cassius Cherea. Yesterday's threat was no longer relevant. Perhaps he had changed his mind about the arena. Perhaps he had found another target for his cruelty. Cherea, in fact, was there, on duty, apparently loyal as always. Hours passed. The sun began to descend. Finally, Caligula stood, satisfied. "Excellent," he declared. "We'll return tomorrow for more celebrations." He began to descend from the tribune, followed by his usual entourage, guards in front, courtiers at the sides, more guards behind. A group of perhaps 20 people. Adequate security for an emperor, but not for a god. And there was the flaw in Caligula's armor. His own megalomania had made him careless. They entered the underground passage. The corridor was narrow, poorly lit by spaced torches. The stone walls echoed every step, every word. Cherea was in front. His heart beat strongly, but his hand was steady. Behind him, Sabinus and other conspirators positioned themselves strategically among the loyal guards. Caligula walked in the center of the group, talking animatedly about the games. "That gladiator, the big one, fought well. Maybe I'll free him, or maybe I'll make him fight a lion tomorrow. Which would be more fun?" They reached a part of the corridor where the torches were more spaced. Almost total darkness. The perfect moment. Cherea turned. "Your Majesty, the password." It was protocol. Guards exchanged passwords regularly. But Caligula, in his divine boredom, frequently gave humiliating passwords to Cherea, a constant way of reminding the tribune of his inferior position. "Today's password," said Caligula, smiling maliciously, "is Jupiter," forcing Cherea to acknowledge his divinity even in that mundane moment. Cherea didn't smile, didn't agree, simply said, "That's the wrong password," and attacked. The dagger entered Caligula's neck, cutting off his response. Blood spurted, hot and dark in the gloom. The emperor god staggered, his eyes wide with shock. Impossible. He was divine. He was immortal. How? Sabinus attacked from behind. Another blade, then another, and another. The conspirators emerged from the shadows like demons, their daggers finding flesh repeatedly. Caligula tried to scream, but his voice came out only as a gurgle. He tried to run, but his legs didn't obey. He fell to his knees, then on his face. His divine blood, identical to the blood of any mortal, formed pools on the stone floor. The loyal guards, stunned by the speed of the attack, took precious seconds to react. Some were brought down by the conspirators. Others fled, running down the corridor, their alarm cries echoing off the walls. Chaerea knelt beside the fallen body. Caligula was still breathing, weakly. His eyes, those eyes that had ordered so many deaths, that had witnessed so much depravity, now looked up with fear. Pure and human fear. "You are not a god," said Chaerea, his voice low but firm. "You never were. Just a bad man." He drove the dagger one last time. And Caligula, emperor of Rome, self-proclaimed god, sexual tyrant, stopped breathing. Silence in the corridor. The conspirators looked at each other, the reality of what they had just done beginning to sink in. They had killed the emperor. There was no going back. Their lives were now in total jeopardy. "To the palace," said Chaerea, standing. "We have to get there before the news spreads chaotically." They ran through the underground corridors, emerging in the palace complex. There they found confusion. Some guards had already spread the news. Others knew nothing. Courtiers ran from one side to another, seeking information, seeking safety. Chaerea went straight to the chambers of Caesonia, Caligula's last wife. He found her with her small daughter, Julia Drusilla, only 1 year old. Caesonia looked at Chaerea, saw the blood on his hands, and immediately knew. "He's dead." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "He is." She didn't cry, didn't plead, just held her daughter closer. "And us?" Chaerea hesitated. The child was innocent, but she was Caligula's daughter. Potential focus of future loyalties. Potential threat. "It has to be done," said Sabinus behind him. "There can be no heirs. There can be no reason for future vengeances." Chaerea closed his eyes. This was an inevitable consequence, but carrying out the act was different from planning it. Make it quick. Make it humane. Minutes later, Caesonia and little Julia Drusilla joined Caligula in death. 3 lives. 3 periods at the end of a story that had stained Rome for 4 years. Meanwhile, in the Senate, the news arrived like an earthquake. Caligula was dead. The tyrant had fallen. But what would come now? Chaos? Civil war? Another tyrant? Consuls emerged from paralysis and convened an emergency session. Praetorian guards, loyal not to Caligula, but to the concept of empire, surrounded the building. And amid the chaos, they found Claudius. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, a man considered an idiot by his family due to a physical disability that made him tremble and stutter. He had been ignored for decades, considered too harmless to be a threat, too incompetent to be useful. He was hiding behind a curtain when guards discovered him. Don't kill me," he begged. "I didn't do anything." But the guards didn't want to kill him. They wanted to proclaim him emperor, because Rome needed immediate leadership, and Claudius, being imperial family, being harmless, seemed an acceptable choice for all sides. Thus, in a cruel historical irony, the man everyone considered an idiot became emperor. And he would prove to be a much more competent ruler than the self-proclaimed genius who preceded him. Rome woke on January 25th to a different world. The nightmare had ended. Caligula was dead. But the scars he left would remain for generations. Caligula's body was cremated in a simple ceremony, almost shameful for an emperor. No pomp, no eulogies, just embarrassed silence as the flames consumed what remained of the self-proclaimed god. His ashes were buried in the gardens of Lamia, in an unmarked tomb. Rome wanted to forget, wanted to erase those years of madness and degradation from collective memory. But forgetting is never complete. His statues were destroyed, but some survived. His decrees were annulled, but the precedents he established remained. His death didn't undo the damage he caused to Roman morality, to the dignity of the Senate, to the very notion of imperial limits. Chaerea was rewarded briefly, but soon fell from grace. Claudius, even being apparently benevolent, couldn't keep close those who had killed an emperor. It would set a dangerous precedent. Chaerea was executed less than a year later, accused of conspiracy against the new emperor. Bitter irony, The man who saved Rome died for the same reason his acts should have prevented. Rome tried to return to normalcy. Claudius proved to be a competent administrator, restoring certain dignity to the imperial office. But the senators who had lived under Caligula were never the same. Their wives, their daughters, carried unspoken shames. Their own memories were prisons. Caligula's sexual empire had ended in blood in a dark corridor, but its shadows would extend for centuries, constant reminders of how low even the greatest civilization can fall when absolute power meets absolute madness. And there, did you manage to follow this story to the end? If you were impressed by this dark saga of Rome, leave here in the comments what city you're watching from. Share this video with someone who needs to know this story. And tell me, did you already know the details of this obscure part of the Roman Empire? Your like and subscription make all the difference. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next videos about stories that marked humanity. Caligula reigned for only 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days. A short period in Rome's vast history, but his impact was disproportionate to the duration of his government. He demonstrated something that humanity would need to relearn repeatedly through the centuries. Absolute power without moral or institutional limits is a recipe for catastrophe. When a single individual concentrates all the power of a state and simultaneously loses contact with reality, the result is suffering on a massive scale. Caligula's reign also revealed an uncomfortable truth about societies. People adapt to the absurd with frightening speed. What seems intolerable on the first day becomes normal on the 100th. Senators who would have preferred death to certain humiliations eventually accepted them as the price of survival. Rome didn't collapse under Caligula because Romans, like humans everywhere, have an extraordinary capacity to normalize horror when the alternative is personal destruction. But perhaps the most important lesson is about the fragility of institutions. Rome had built a sophisticated political system over centuries. Laws, traditions, structures of shared power. Caligula destroyed much of this in less than 4 years. He proved that institutions are only as strong as the collective will to defend them. When fear overcomes principle, when personal survival overcomes collective good, even the most advanced civilizations can regress to tyranny. The sexual dimension of his tyranny also deserves reflection. Caligula understood intuitively that sexual humiliation is a peculiarly effective tool of control. It destroys not just the individual but their family and social connections. It creates shame that silences victims. And it establishes a demonstration of power that terrifies observers. Rome eventually recovered from Caligula. The empire would continue for another 4 centuries in the West, much longer in the East. But something changed fundamentally. The illusion that Roman emperors were different from Oriental tyrants had been broken. The pretense that Rome was governed by laws, not by men, proved fragile. Historians still debate whether Caligula was genuinely insane or performatively cruel, whether his madness was mental illness or calculated political strategy to concentrate power. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, a man with problematic predispositions that were amplified by the complete absence of limits on his power. What remains indisputable is the damage he caused. Lives destroyed, families ruined, traditions profaned, and Rome, the eternal, stained by memories that could never be completely erased. Caligula was killed in that dark corridor in 41 AD, but his shadow over Rome never completely disappeared. It persists in historical records, in warnings that echo through the centuries, reminding humanity that civilization is a fragile achievement, always a few bad decisions away from returning to barbarism. And perhaps that's the final lesson. Eternal vigilance is not just the price of freedom, but of humanity itself. Because monsters like Caligula don't emerge in a vacuum. They are created when societies abandon principles, when institutions bow to individual power, when fear replaces courage. Rome survived Caligula. The question that remains is, can we learn from Rome?